Joining us on Skype for our next segment is Patrice Onwuka. Of course, she's a friend of mine, and she's a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Welcome, Patrice. How you doing?
I'm great. Good to see you both.
You know, every time I turn on Fox, I see you. You know, you're kind of beating me at the number of appearances you get on the big networks there. So congrats on all your success.
Well, thank you. I'm just trying to pound the pavement in support of greater opportunity for women.
Well, next question is yours, Marc, so go ahead, please.
Kamala Harris, the senator from California and a presidential candidate, has just proposed a plan to find companies that employ over 100 workers who do not pay men and women equally. What's your take on this?
You know, I think this plan can backfire on women. I actually think Senator Harris is starting from the wrong premise about the wage gap. And she's proposing a policy that could make women less enticing to hire and erodes the flexibility that we enjoy in the workplace and can negotiate for ourselves.
What do you think about that, Marc?
What would be your solution? Because you acknowledge that there's a problem.
Sure.
What's your solution?
So first of all, let me just explain the wage gap. We hear that it's about 20 cents, or women earn 80 cents on the dollar that a man makes. However, when you control for factors such as education, time out of the workforce, the number of hours men and women work, you see that wage gap shrink to probably 3 to 5 cents. And even then, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that it's not necessarily driven by gender discrimination. So number one, we need to understand that if there's a wage gap, it is not because your employer is discriminating against you simply because of your gender, but it is because of the differences, the choices that we make in education and occupation, but also the differences in how we negotiate for greater salaries or for more flexibility and more time off. And so when it comes to solutions, I think that's where the federal government can come in to say, we want more flexibility in the workplace. And I think we're actually seeing some legislation coming from conservatives that would expand the different types of flexible work arrangements. And then I think we also need to attack our labor laws that are 80 years old and outdated, which do not reflect what people really want today.
Patrice, candidly, you sound like a defender of the status quo. You sound like a lobbyist.
Oh, goodness.
You sound like to me because that's what I hear from the defenders
not the
of the
workplace
status quo.
of today, and the laws being outdated that reflect the past workplace. I mean, when you a third of workers right now would trade a pay increase for greater flexibility, for the ability to work from home at least half of the time. Our labor laws right now don't make room for that. They assume that everybody is clocking in and clocking out in a 9-to-5 job and sitting behind a desk. You know, when we talk about the pay gap and the wage gap, let's educate women and empower them rather to make choices that say, okay, if you value being a teacher, that's fantastic. Do that. But recognize the workplace does not pay you the same as if you're an accountant or you're a civil engineer. So let's empower women with knowledge.
Let's also do this, Patrice. Let's not continue to make excuses for a system that has excluded women. Why are teachers paid less? Because it was historically a profession populated by women, not because the value of that job is any less than a value of a computer technician. This is what we're talking about, long-standing, if you will, structural exclusion of women. And so what we've got to do with Senator Harris is give her credit for putting an idea on the table. Give her credit for seeking to address a problem that overwhelming numbers of Americans believe it is a problem. Even as a man with 2 daughters who are coming up in the workforce, smart, educated daughters, this problem affects not only women, it affects children, it affects families. So I don't think we can defend the status quo. Now, we can get into a great conversation about work rules and the specifics of labor policy, but the fundamental issue is that there is a gender pay gap in America, and I think the American people across the board want to see something done about it.
Well, and let me just correct you in saying that according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is our government source of data, the wage gap is not driven by discrimination, which is what you're suggesting. It is driven by the choices that we as women make. And isn't it fantastic? I'm speaking as a woman that I get to choose what I want. I may decide that, you know what, I actually don't want that promotion. I want to be able to work from home so I could take my kids to school. And so, you're talking about structural, the legacies of of discrimination against women. I am so proud that women have come very far. Now, that doesn't mean, though, that different types of jobs don't carry different types of pay, and that we shouldn't recognize that and tell women that. And to hide that is really dishonest, and I think it does a disservice.
Hold on, I'm going to jump in now because I haven't said anything.
Them to be able to do and go into what they want to study, but recognizing what the cost is going to be on the other side.
Yeah.
That is not about defending the status
Marc,
quo.
I think
it's about recognizing where we are.
Marc, I think Patrice's question, you guys agree, of course, on whether it exists or not, but I think with policies like this, the fear and what Patrice is aiming at obliquely are the unintended policy consequences, right? So even if this is coming from a good place from Senator Harris, I guess the fear is that this will have a chilling effect on the labor market and, in fact, hurt women in the workplace.
Until we see, the problem is those arguments are used to block, thwart us into inaction, where we do zero, we do nothing, which is usually how status quo interests work. Let's create a lot of confusion. Let's talk about unintended consequences. Let's talk about costs, and then we end up doing nothing. My mother is a perfect example. My mother is a very talented woman. She grew up in the South. She ended up being a teacher. She wanted to be a doctor, but the laws, the decisions, the systems of her time forced her into a profession which was a dominant profession predominantly held by women. And that's what we have to understand. It's not just about quote unquote choices. It's also about opportunity. It's also about expectations. It's also about pathways. So we can't defend
There's a cultural
the
element.
There's the majority of the population of this country are women. They're going to be heard on this issue. They're not going to be convinced that there's no problem. They're not going to get into a debate over a bunch of technical work rules. They demand action. And this is going to be central.
Your mom was not able to go into the career that she wanted to. I'm really proud, though, that there's so many young women like myself who can go into those types of careers. And so when we're talking about the gender pay gap, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that there is a difference in what drives it. And a lot of those differences are very controllable. And so when we talk about an action, what we don't necessarily think is going to work is just a law that will wipe out every change the wage gap, when in fact it's not driven by necessarily discrimination, but by those choices. So let's recognize that we as women have so many opportunities, especially in an economy like this one, where there's 7 million unfilled positions. So how do we get young women into those high-paying positions if they want to go there? But recognizing that, hey, maybe they don't want to go into those high-paying positions because they take time away from family. And I think that is what is left out of the conversation.
Yeah,
Patrice, you get the Patrice. We're out of time, but go ahead.
Appreciate your position. I challenge you to come up with a meaningful idea to address the problem, even if you think it is small. What Senator Harris has done is put this issue in play. What Senator Harris has done is come up with an idea when there's been a lot of lip service, a lot of jawboning, a lot of study, a lot of paralysis of analysis. Now she's put this idea in play. I'm glad she has, and I think it's worthy of debate.
Go ahead, Patrice. You're the last word. Go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm glad that she's bringing forward an idea, and I'm glad that we can rebut that idea and point out the ways that it can actually be harmful to women.